Sorry, just give me a second to get on my soapbox here. I talk a lot about declarative code and code organization and things like that, and I always hear that we should just do the most simple, direct, and obvious thing to get the job done. Sometimes this is accompanied by one of those many programming acronyms that I think are next to useless. Keep it simple, stupid. Personally, I prefer PASS. These acronyms generally don't say anything useful, erase all nuance, and most directly contradict the other acronyms anyway. But what exactly is simple? At least in the context of declarative code, this generally implies the imperative approach. Need to display some data based on some variable? Well, you just execute the request and set the data on some variable to display in the template. Why overcomplicate things? Why bother with the more declarative solution that might look something like this? This video isn't about demonstrating what value the declarative approach here provides or even what it is. Anyone who watches this channel has probably had enough of that. I'll link to some of my other videos if you're unfamiliar with this topic, but spoiler alert, I think the declarative approach provides very direct and real benefits that, on a slightly larger scale, end up being the more simple option. I want to approach this subject from a different angle in this video. I could accept that declarative code or RxJS is an overcomplication if the alternative was generally working well, but I don't think it's too much of a hot take to say that a lot of apps today kind of suck. The end user experience kind of sucks a lot of the time, and the developer experience sucks a lot of the time too. This applies to more than just Angular apps, but I've been doing professional Angular development since the dark days of the AngularJS to Angular 2 transition. I've consulted on probably hundreds of Angular code bases, and at least from my perspective, the average application is drowning in a backlog of bug fixes and workarounds for bugs that create more bugs because the architecture of the application has slowly bloated to a tangle of imperative code that operates something like this, rather than perhaps what the alternative declarative codebase might have looked like. I don't think the devs or teams in charge of these codebases are bad programmers. I'm certain that a lot of these people are better programmers than I am. And yes, I'm aware that it's easy for consultants to criticize a codebase without understanding the sorts of constraints and pressures the team has been working under. But I think it is just extremely hard to write imperative style code that is good and scales well, and often we don't have control over the architecture of the app. Throw that in with business demands and time constraints, and you have a recipe for trouble. I think that it is hard to write imperative code well. It certainly can be done. Obviously, it can be done because ultimately declarative code is running on top of imperative code at some point. But I think declarative style code is actually the easy mode most people just haven't learned yet. It is imperative code that is the overcomplication. Or perhaps it is more accurate to say that imperative code is simpler but overcomplicates your application, especially in the context of developing front-end apps. Sure, there is some investment involved in learning how to properly organize cables and use the cable ties and cord trays and whatever other fancy gadgets cable organization people use. But once you make that investment, the payoff down the road is a whole lot greater. I don't think having to learn how to use cable ties is a good argument against using them. This image from Mike Pearson is a fantastic example that makes this cable metaphor a little more concrete. This example is color-coded to show what the code is controlling. As you can see with the declarative approach, everything that controls a particular thing is all defined in one spot, specifically where the declaration of the thing itself is. With the imperative approach, everything is more spread out and tangled. The imperative style might seem easier until you have more than about 10 cables to manage. In some cases, complexity can be dealt with later, and it's fine to take the attitude of, we will create abstractions and patterns if and when necessary. Often this is the correct attitude. But it is not a good strategy to wait until you get into this situation before you do something about it. You can't just add in some cable ties to this after the fact. Most likely what happens is you keep living with this monster that has been created and you maintain it because it is now a huge expense to fix it. Declarative code is not some unnecessary abstraction. It's how we avoid getting into a mess in the first place. There is an alternate universe where the declarative approach is what is used by default, and the devs that live there are a lot happier. At least that's my take on why maybe we should be spending more time on overcomplications like declarative code. But I'd love to hear any takes you have on why the average codebase kind of sucks. And if you found this video interesting at all, even if you think I'm wrong, a like or subscribe before you go would be very much appreciated. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back here for the next video, with probably less ranting next time.